every week is an opportunity to show, to get ahead, and it's the perspective of how you see things.
There are training players, who do wonderful things that make you say, this player has such quality. Then for other reasons, they don't show it on the pitch. That creates doubts for the coach. Those doubts, when we're talking about the elite, are absolutely decisive. The coach plays you or he doesn't, and that's it. 99.9% of coaches wanted Puy because he conveyed things that very few people do. It has allowed him, I repeat, perhaps surely one of the best center-backs in the history of the club and of Spain, right? For sure.
Jordi, how are you? Good morning.
Hi, how's it going? Good morning. Very well, here we are.
Well, in the first podcast, in the first episode, we talked about why players who train so much, even if they train a lot, don't end up performing in matches. Today, I want to go a step further, and I want to understand why, even if a player isn't as talented, the coach continues to trust him over a player who is more talented or has more skills. And I want to understand this coach's psychology and what goes through their mind.
Well, you've opened another can of worms that's fundamental, right? And that happens many times, right? And that many people wonder about, wow, even the public people, wow, how can it be that this player who seems so well doesn't play as much, and the coach almost has more of a soft spot for another type of player who maybe at first glance doesn't have as much talent, right? So here there are, we'll talk about it now, there are many factors that can influence it and so on. And then also, I think it's very important, and we'll talk about it, right, to differentiate the opinion or the treatment a coach might have when we're talking about a coach who deals with professionals versus a coach who is dealing with kids, is in youth development football. So obviously the treatment nor the conditions nor what he thinks can be the same, right? I think, right?
Sure. Well, as you've said, there are several levels, there are several stages in a footballer's life that are different, right? Each one has its moments, and every footballer goes through the same stages. Starting, if you want, let's start with being young, or when you're enjoying football and you're not worried about this thing of playing or the competition or the realities of football that start appearing further down the line. What is it that a coach has to do in these times, in these stages?
Well, obviously a coach in the developmental stage, sometimes it's talked about a lot, right? I think he has to be almost an educator, right? He almost has to be a person who has to try to be closer to the player perhaps than when we're talking about a coach at a professional level. The coach always has to try to help the player, always, whatever the level may be, and he has to try to make that player improve, whatever the level may be, professional, developmental, and so on. But I think that all of this at a developmental level, well, it has to be multiplied and it has to be even closer, and the coach has to. We've talked many times about this vicious circle, right? It's that the player has no confidence. Why does he have no confidence? Because the coach asks him for things that don't. So we enter a circle that you say, how do I break it, right? I believe that in the developmental stage, the coach has to be, in that sense, very, very proactive. If he has to break that circle, right? And he has to provide all the facilities in the world. He has to help him in every possible way to break that circle so that the player feels comfortable and so that in the end the player improves, grows, and gradually reaches more of his level, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Therefore, in the formative stage, the figure of the coach is basic, right? And it's often said, right, that, or we say when we've managed sports organizations, one always says or thinks that perhaps the best coaches, the best should be in the formative stage, right?
Sure, yeah.
Because that's when you really forge the kids, you forge the player. And that's basic, it's an essential stage, right?
Yes, well, moving on to when?
No, you know it perfectly well. You've lived through all these stages and you know perfectly well what all this is about.
Yes. In those first 12, 13, 14 years, you're just enjoying it. And now it's true that when you get to 16, 17 years old, that's when things start to get a bit more serious, right? And this changes the role of the coach as well, little by little. It's no longer so everyone plays, everyone has fun. Now it's more, okay, we're competing more seriously, and the players are, well, in your case, you've probably seen it too. I've seen it as well. It's a different competition.
Obviously, as the ages go by, well, the role of the coach also varies a bit more, right? It's not the same, the coach who is working with kids of 12, 13 years old, 10, as the coach who is working with kids of 16, 18.
Yes.
Or the coach who is in a professional elite team, right? This is evident.
And now it's something to think about. What is it that, or why is it that sometimes the most talented player isn't a starter?
This is a little question. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's complicated. There are many factors, right? I think that many times it has a lot to do with the attitude sometimes of that player. It's true that talent is basic. Having the qualities is essential, but nowadays in football, this alone isn't enough. It's very difficult. It's not enough just to have quality, to have skills, which is assumed, right, in the player who really has talent and who aspires to reach professionalism, right? But then other factors intervene that often tip the scales one way or the other. And the coach is on that side, and sometimes that talented player, that wonderful player, we were talking about it earlier in another podcast, right? There are training players who do wonderful things where you say, this player has quality, then for other reasons he doesn't show it on the field. So of course that creates doubts for the coach. I repeat, okay? Going back to what we were saying before, those doubts when we're talking about the elite are absolutely decisive. The coach either plays you or he doesn't, and that's it. When you're in the formative stage, you have to try to get that boy, that child, to overcome those difficulties, give him every opportunity, even if he's wrong, even if he makes mistakes, even if it costs you games. Because obviously, in the developmental stage, it doesn't matter if you win or lose, or at least that's how it should be, right? That's how it should be.
Sure, of course.
In professional football, no. But it's true that often the player, most people feel has more talent, who's better and all that. Sometimes in the coach's eyes, they struggle more. Why? Because he sees the day-to-day, because maybe that player who is very talented, maybe doesn't have the necessary commitment, maybe doesn't put in the necessary effort. Sometimes there are issues, let's say, of discipline, of trying to make them realize that this isn't enough. You have to take it slow, but there are many factors, right? And as I was saying, you've lived in many teams, you've been in many situations over many years, and you've found yourself in these situations, right? Sometimes you say, damn, how can it be that he plays this one and not the other? Well, because maybe there are other factors that sometimes when you're playing, you miss, but the coach sees them and they tip the scales. I repeat, okay? Always keeping in mind what type of player you are training.
Sure. No, there are actually many. For instance, the example of Puyol, who maybe did not have more skills than, or did not have as much skill as others, but he always played or was always there as captain. And why? What is it that Puyol has? He always played and he was the one, well, I mean, honestly, you just couldn't take him out of there.
This is without a doubt an extreme example, let's say, right? Puyol, as we all know, has surely been one of the very best, most outstanding centre-backs in the entire history of this club, for sure. So he actually had some difficult, complicated beginnings in his career. At first, he played as a midfielder, which is a very different position. Well, then, after some time, they eventually found his true position on the field, and he played as a centre-back, which is where he really made his name and became a legend. And being a player, and not just any player, but a genuinely good player, is obviously important, but maybe, just maybe, there were actually quite a few other players out there, perhaps several, who were a lot like him, or who maybe even had more talent than he did. But Puyol had one thing that nobody else had, and it's that commitment, that strength, that I was going to use the term professionalism, but not for kids, for professionals, yes, but of taking care of himself, of always being dedicated, motivated, with an enormous work capacity, a desire to compete, and that made him a very, very, very special player, with other characteristics different from others, right? But that maybe at first you don't see so much, they don't catch your attention as much, but then at the coaches level, 99.9% of coaches wanted Puyol.
Sure, that's the thing.
Why? Well, because he conveyed things to you that very few people convey. So that, I repeat, that has allowed him to be, I repeat, perhaps surely one of the best centre-backs in the history of the club and of Spain, right? For sure.
No, it really makes you think. because it actually implies that you don't have to have the skill of, or an incredible skill. I mean, if you have other factors that you can stand out for, because of those factors, well, you can play perfectly.
Well, more than that, it's what we were discussing before, right? The idea that with just talent nowadays in football, if you want to reach the elite with just talent and doing things very well, well, it probably won't be enough for you. It won't be enough unless you're something stratospheric. But even then, nowadays, it won't be enough, because for a player today at a high level who has talent, who is good, well, work is demanded of them. A series of obligations are demanded at a defensive level, at a commitment level, at a physical level. So there are many factors that come into play. So there are players who perhaps don't have a level of such extraordinary talent, of technical ability, but they make up for it with other qualities that at a coaching level and then later at a professional level are absolutely decisive. Therefore, we must instill from the developmental stage the idea that we must foster, of course, most definitely talent, individual quality, of course, but we must try to make the player see that there's more, that there are other things in football besides that, which are sometimes absolutely decisive for whether a player makes it or not.
Sure. In my experience, I've seen that, for example, it's always those who best understand what the coach says or those who do what the coach asks who usually play. I mean, I've seen that players who aren't as talented, but not just through strength, the desire to win, but just by understanding what the coach tells them and doing what he says, they already play everything. Like they're not the favorites, but like the ones they tend to trust the most.
Of course, you've seen it.
Because they do what they're told and they do everything right, they don't fail. They don't have
to. And because going back to this example you've given, which is great, because there are players, I repeat, without having perhaps so much quality, but for example, they're very intelligent players and they're players who have great tactical ability. So, geez, the coach says, well, maybe this one might not be as polished, but I know this one will fulfill his defensive duties. I know he'll make the tactical moves he needs to make. So tactical intelligence is another factor that tips the scales. And I'll say it again, and I don't want to be repetitive, but it's just the reality. At a professional level, this is absolutely decisive. At a developmental level, well, that player who perhaps isn't as good at whatever, you have to help him and try to make him improve all those things he's not so good at. Whether it's dedication, whether it's physical, whether it's tactical, they have to improve and you have to work with him so he improves, right? Because he's in the developmental stage, right? But it's true that these are factors that at a coaching level, when you're in doubt or at certain moments, you choose one that maybe most people would say, yeah, but this kid is better. He's better at some things, but at others, maybe not so much, right? So there are many factors that come into play.
Sure, it depends on the context too.
On the
coach, it really varies quite a lot from coach to coach. Maybe you have something special that one coach sees, while another coach is looking for other qualities even more.
Look, I always say one thing, an example, which is when we talk. For example, I personally like tennis a lot. I'm a tennis lover. And one of the things I like about tennis is that the player, when they don't like the coach, they change them. The player changes them. And that's it. In football, no. I mean by this that in the end it's true that every coach has their ideas, their concepts, they prioritize some things over others. And so in the end it's true that a player cannot change a coach of a football team. So you depend a bit on a coach, on a person who has their own criteria.
On the situation.
And that's how it is. But that's why I go back to what I was telling you before. The coach's role is very important. The open mind that a coach has in youth football. They have to be open to everything. They have to try to help everyone. They have to try. Their main goal has to be that all the players they have improve, grow, and reach the level and start taking on all the concepts. The ones they already have down well and the ones they don't have so well, even more so.
And the importance of patience too. Maybe a player might be going through a period of not playing and you might genuinely feel they're doing everything right, but maybe what they really need is that patience and mental strength too. Here we also see the combination of all aspects of the game, not just being good, as we said, being talented, not just being very good physically or being a physical beast running all over the field, because it's also knowing how to combine all these themes, knowing how to have that physical base, have the technical base, have good mental and tactical strength. And this is absolutely what makes a complete player, having everything. You can distinguish yourself in some aspect, but you have to have...
Totally. So to reach the top elite, you have to have good concepts in everything, but Obviously, there are always players who stand out in one concept or another. And so when there's a player who stands out in everything, then we find ourselves with a phenomenon of which there are few in the world, right? But in the end, a player has to have the sum of many qualities. That's why, going back to what we said at the beginning, it's not enough just to be a player. No, it's that he's very skillful. Perfect, fantastic. That skill must be enhanced, of course. Is that such? But it's also important that they have physical improvement, that they understanding tactical concepts to keep improving. But in the end, it's a team game. There's a series of movements. They have to start adopting them, understanding them. They have to be a disciplined, committed player. So all the part that you don't see, all the invisible training. As you grow, there are things like taking care of yourself, nutrition, rest, the life you lead. Being a footballer is a thing. It's almost a way of life. It's a way of understanding this. So when a player arrives, there has to be a union of all the factors involved for that player to actually reach the elite level. And I repeat, the coach's obligation in youth football is it's basic. It's trying to make sure all these factors affecting the player keep improving, and they keep assimilating them, so the player grows, so the player improves, right?
Sure.
And that's the main objective, right?
And now, to understand a bit better, what mistakes make a coach lose confidence in a player, for example?
Well, it's what I was telling you, right? In the end, coaches are also human. So what's frustrating many times, and I'm speaking from a personal point of view, sometimes it's frustrating to see, and it happens, to see players that you say, you're watching them train every day and you say, wow, this kid has fantastic potential. He has wonderful potential. He has technical qualities, like he might have a good physique and all. And you say, wow. But then not that sometimes there are players who just don't have the necessary dedication, who don't have a commitment, who aren't hard workers, whatever. So, and no matter how much you try to encourage that, you don't succeed. And you realize that player having a lot of quality, maybe if he doesn't improve that, he won't make it, because of what we said before, because that alone isn't enough. So
sure,
this is frustrating, I think, at a coaching level. When you really see a kid who has potential, you see he has some major shortcoming, and you can't manage to improve it, right? Or you can't get him to accept it. He doesn't realize it, obviously, but you realize that, geez, that kid with the potential he has, maybe
sure,
if he doesn't improve this, if he doesn't work on this, he won't manage. Once he reaches a certain level, he won't manage to keep prospering, because that alone won't be enough.
Sure.
And that at a coaching level is frustrating, because you go on and such. You try, and many times you succeed.
No, look.
But sometimes you don't. That's why not everyone makes it, nor does everyone succeed.
Sure.
Right? But that, I think, at a coaching level, geez, it feels bad. It's frustrating, because in a way, you haven't accomplished your job, because your job is to improve that for him. That's what a coach has to do, improve his shortcomings and boost the skills he has.
Sure.
And that's sometimes frustrating, and you'll have noticed, and there are players who assimilate it. I repeat, one thing is that they can't, because they don't have the capacity. And the other is when you say, geez, that kid has capacity, has potential, but for whatever reason, there are other things that either he doesn't want or can't or doesn't understand, whatever. And you say, geez. And that, from a coach's perspective, is
frustrating.
And you've seen it in every team you've been on. There are players that even teammates notice, right?
No.
Yeah.
Sometimes teammates,
they notice it. But that, I repeat, at the youth development level, it's frustrating. When you're coaching high-level professionals, they either do what you say or someone else plays. That's a whole different story, right? But in youth development, that's just frustrating, isn't it? If you found the topic interesting, if you like the concepts, if you think these concepts can help you keep improving as a player, click the link in the description.
Yeah, no, and we also see, for example, a player goes to a trial. For instance, you've seen many players doing trials, or you've gone to scout many players. And many also want to stand out, or they want to stand out with great plays. They want to do it all themselves. They want to put in a great play, a good goal, or whatever. But I want to know which behaviors carry more weight than just a good play.
Well, this is also another aspect that gives us a lot to talk about. We could talk at length about this as well, the subject of trials. It's a difficult and complicated moment, and it's important, very important, that the observer, the one analyzing the trial, the one analyzing the kid, the coach watching him, the one who ultimately has to decide, must be absolutely aware of the situation the player is going through. It's a situation that, whether you like it or not, is stressful. In a way, it's hard because sometimes they feel like, geez, if I'm not good today, then I won't make it or whatever, which isn't really the case. So it's very important that the coach watching the trial is first of all aware of the stressful situation the player is in, very important. And then you have to try to look past the tree to see the forest. I don't know if I'm making sense, right? You have to be able, when you see that player, a kid, even if he's not sharp today, not lucky, to be able to say, geez, well, he wasn't good today, it's true. But geez, he has things that make me think he might have the level or that he can improve. Regardless of whether today, for whatever reason, nerves, because of whatever, because he doesn't know anyone, because he's nervous, because of that, because of mom, because of whatever. Regardless of that, the coach has to be able to look past the tree and see that behind it, maybe that kid has quality or does interesting things. That's why when you go to do trials, it's a moment where you really have to be focused and very attentive and try to be as open-minded as possible, because it's not just what you see at first glance. You have to try to see beyond that. And from a player's point of view, it's stressful. It's a situation that's sometimes complicated, no matter how much, as it should be, no matter how much in that case, the family or the whole environment tries to convey calmness to him. But it's a situation.
The environment is very important.
The environment is, when you go to a trial, if your environment also demands things or gives you responsibility, then the kid gets all shaky, right? So it's very important to realize that it's not the end of the world. It seems like the world ends in one no. How many players are there who don't pass a trial and come back and go to... So you have to convey calmness and try. Then another thing is the player's attitude, or what you have to try to explain to them to do, right? That's something else. But you basically have to try to keep them calm, let them do it, and be clear that the one observing, the one watching, the coach, isn't just going to look at whether he shot and scored a goal. This is sometimes circumstantial, it's not important at all, or that he scored 3 goals. A kid in a trial can score 10 goals because he's there and he doesn't really have... And another who doesn't, or who positions himself well, or who does, or you say, wow, this kid, that's the one who catches your eye.
Those are behaviors that,
I repeat, it's difficult, you know? It's a situation for the one doing the trial, for the one who has to decide. You have to have an open mind. It's not easy, and you shouldn't let yourself be carried away by what's easy, what's comfortable. Like the kid scored 6 goals. He scored 6 goals, but maybe not. He scored 6 goals because he's just standing there at the goal. It's a complex and very important issue, both from the point of view of the one doing the trial, obviously from the player, and of course from the whole environment the player has, right? Well, you've done trials, Nico, you've done trials with important teams, and whether you like it or not, no matter what they tell you and all, there's a certain degree of stress and nervousness, and that's just how it is.
No, and well, in my case, coming from the United States,
Imagine that.
The United States to Spain for the first time, and I didn't know I was moving to Spain until I'd been there a month thinking I was on vacation, and suddenly my father told me one day that we're staying here, we're staying to live, and because of all the circumstances, we're going for the football dream too. We're staying here for football above all. And of course, I was doing trials, and it was very different here than in the United States. And you do feel some nerves and a pressure, but you have to know when you step on the field, forget everything, have an environment that supports you, as they said, and enjoy it. You have to enjoy the experience, because you also have to think that there are people who would kill to have an opportunity that they can't, or they're in difficult situations, and you have to, above all, be grateful for what you have. To be able to be in a trial or to be able to play football, the fact of playing football is a blessing. So you also have to know how to be grateful and always calm. Obviously, you're going to be nervous, but I think if I have to help anyone watching this, any player, they need to approach it with the calm that it's not the end of the world. Like you said, you'll have more trials, and the good thing about football is you'll have more opportunities. You get those opportunities every single week. When you're on a team, from what I'm experiencing now, every week is a chance to prove yourself, to move forward. And it's the perspective of how you see it. For example, if a coach isn't quite putting you in the game, you have to show him on Monday when you go back to training, like, look, I'm here, I'm going to fight for this. Or have the other perspective of, I give up, I won't train, you're not playing me, so I won't do anything. Those are two ways to see it. And the player who goes the furthest is the one, well, who has that first vision. That I'm going, every week is an opportunity, and I'm going to fight and have that mental strength. That is
the as you say, football always gives you another one, right? You always have another chance, don't you? And that, I repeat, this is essential, especially when we're talking about early ages, right? Kids of 10, 12, 13, 14 years old. It's absolutely essential what you were saying, right? Like we said before, right? That those being calm, not and thinking that even if a dribble didn't work out or a shot or whatever, if the person observing you knows what they're doing, they won't decide just based on that. They'll decide based on many other things that they have to, like what I told you before about the tree, right? They have to try to scratch the first layer, which can sometimes be good or not. Sometimes yes. Sometimes a kid has everything go right and it works and you say, wow, this one. But sometimes it happens that, well, you're not sharp, you're nervous or whatever. But the one observing you, the coach, the one who decides, has to be able to see if behind that specific mistake there's something there or not.
of course.
So you don't have to, but even so, right? Even if they convey calmness, even if your environment is fantastic, it's a situation that isn't comfortable. But as you said, it's not more important than it actually is. There are 1,000 opportunities. Football always gives you another one. And above all, you have to be that calm and relaxed. But it's true that it's a topic that goes a long way and that it's a situation we've all lived through at one point or another in our lives. And that,
Yes, of course.
well, you have to analyze it and look at it, because depending on how everything goes, well, sometimes it can turn out one way or it can turn out another. And that's how it is.
Yes. Now, another example comes to mind. Another quality a player might have that makes them stand out, and it's like we discussed with the Puyol example, that ability to lift up teammates. Or I don't know if I think it's a matter of their own personality or like character, that some people are one way, some are another. You see all those captains who have that personality to lift the players up and encourage them. Because when a player has that intensity and that character, it's infectious to everyone. And I think, tell me as a coach, is that something that you look for? That one player lifts everyone up and makes everyone get fired up in that way?
In the end, going back to the example of Puyol, we used to say that 100% of coaches wanted Puyol. Why? Because maybe without being an absolute virtuoso with the ball, which he didn't need to be, he was exceptionally good at many things. And among them, the mentality, the character, that strength, and that in a team is priceless.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, having players of this level at the elite stage, I can't even tell you. In the developmental stage, you start seeing that there are players who have a special character, who rebel against difficulty, who in a complicated match, well, they bring this out, you can improve this, you work on it, but you either have it or you don't. Everyone has their virtues. And there's that type of player who has that mental strength. I think we talked before in the previous podcast about the importance of mentality. It's just basic. The one who has that mental capacity has a very high percentage of making it, because this whole journey, and you know perfectly well, it's not easy. There will be moments of difficulty for 1,000 things, for what you mentioned before, because a coach doesn't play me. What do? Do I give up or keep going? The one who has the mentality keeps going and in the end finishes playing.
Mm-hmm.
Because one day I have a major injury. Mentality is 90% of everything. Because one day I have a personal problem. Because one day I have a problem with, I don't know what. Because one day my girlfriend, whatever. I don't know. There are 1,000 things that affect you. So having the mental capacity to overcome that is absolutely decisive. And increasingly, it's one of the factors that make a player, all things being equal technically, or even inferior. If they have that capacity, they'll arrive before another, because it's very important.
And another thing that came to mind is that football changes super fast. I mean, in a matter of days, you can be in a situation and the situation changes completely for you in no time. And that's the beauty of football too, that you have these constant opportunities. And well, I've also lived through situations where from not playing to the situation changing and starting to play, and you have to always be prepared. That's why I say Either you have that mentality of moving forward, keep going, even if they don't play, you keep going, or give up, because the one who has that mentality of keep going and keep going, when the opportunity comes and football changes, that's where you end up standing out.
It's that phrase, right? That is said so much, right? Well, that inspiration finds me working, right? I mean, in the end, when it reaches you that you have trained well, that you are prepared, that you have assimilated concepts, that you have things right, what the coach tells you tactically, you have it mastered, of course. When it comes in football, as you very well say, is changing. From one day to the next, it turns out that you start playing, that something goes up, that you are at a level and you are unstoppable. Or the other way around.
Or
the other way around it happens. So players who at first, whatever, then for reasons that aren't known well, they stop performing. There are many things that influence, but without a doubt, the one who has the luck, let's say, of having this character of rebelling against adversities of that work capacity, well, they have advantages. And we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Why are there players who, without being so extraordinary, make it, and others who have more technical capacity surely don't? Well, because that alone is not enough. There are many factors that surround that make them decisive. That's how it is.
So you always have to be prepared. That's the message.
Clear? Always.
Because you never really know when you might be able to make a meaningful change in your life at any moment.
But that's like, what can I tell you? Well,
and when you're there, not to believe that everyone, as you said, it can happen the other way around.
Reverse.
You can't settle for being there. You always have to
try. I was telling you, like the coaches, the professionals. When you're working, you're in a team, you're 100% in the team. When for whatever reason you're not working, you don't have a team, those coaches, you have to be constantly training. You have to always be up to date with the tactical innovations that there may be of all the products that can come out from a technical point of view. What products, what programs, what things can make you improve as a coach that will allow you to do your main objective, which, as I said before, which is none other than trying to make your players improve, make them better. That's the main objective, both in the youth level and in the professional. Because if you make your players better, your team will surely be better, and if it's better, it will have more success, and you will also improve. So always, you have to be, that's why we were commenting a bit, that the thing about football, the thing about coaching, the thing about being in this world is a way of life, and it's a passion. It's a thing that whether you're in or not, you have to be constantly seeing, analyzing, learning what other colleagues do, what other people do, because this moves. It's not a static thing. It evolves, and one has to be up to date to be able to help, again, I repeat, to help other players.
And now, moving on to another topic, we talked earlier about trials, players going through trials, or players in matches who are training. Many want to stand out with the ball. They want to stand out technically. They want to make the right play. But how should, or what are the off-the-ball behaviors that a player should have?
That's a good one, because it's true that many people, and it's important, what they do with the ball is important, of course. A player who has technical ability has to show it, and that's fine. But earlier I was telling you about the importance of the person doing the trial, the one watching, moving the tree aside to see the forest. One of the very important parts when you move the tree aside, the forest, is what this kid does when he doesn't have the ball. It's very important. First, how he positions himself. Whether he goes where everyone else goes or is able to pull away to maintain distances. This concept of distances we've talked about so many times, which even if they haven't been taught, many players have it innately. They maintain the distance, they pull away so that the ball reaches them. So how does that player behave without the ball? What is that kid's reaction, even if he's young, to a mistake? This is very important.
I was going to ask you, do you notice these small details?
Well, that's the importance.
Or body language, for example.
Sure, exactly. When he makes a mistake, what does he do? Well, there's the player who practically disappears. Or there's the player who rebels, like we said before, and says, oh, well, next time. There are many things besides what he does with the ball, which is, of course, important, right? A player who's good with the ball, well, he already has, that's a major advantage. But then all those behaviors he shows when he doesn't have the ball, from a certain age, is he supportive of the effort? When he loses it, does he work? Does he just watch? Does he help his teammate? How does he react to a teammate's comment? There are many things, like I said, about moving the tree aside, that besides what he does with the ball, you have to notice, and sometimes they're very important. And even at young ages, there are behaviors that can already give you an idea of what this player might be like. Then they evolve, and you really never know which way they'll go. But you have to be able to distinguish those behaviors. So everything he does without the ball is very important too, because it gives you an idea of what he can be. And obviously, as you move up the scale, when you reach a high level or professionalism, what you do without the ball is very important.
Would you say it's more important than what they do with the ball, or just as important?
In certain positions, in certain teams, with a certain idea of play, well, I'd practically tell you yes. The ball, obviously the ball. It defines everything, but those details of what he does, how he behaves, how he acts, how he reacts are very important, and one has to be able, during a trial for a younger kid, to be able to start identifying some of these behaviors, because they can be important.
In the last podcast, we also talked about the parents and the importance they have in a player's development. What should parents demand in the short term from a player?
We already discussed it a bit too. I think it's very important. And I would extend it to the environment, right? But obviously the environment, there's no one closer than your parents. So your family, the people around you every day, it's absolutely important. I think that in the short term, listen to what I'm saying, you shouldn't demand anything. You shouldn't demand anything. You shouldn't demand anything. I think what you have to do is convey. And what you have to convey to the child, we're talking about kids in the developmental stage, is basically peace of mind. No demands at all. The demands that they have to convey sport-wise will already be given by their coach, by their club, by whoever. The father, I think the environment's job is to convey peace of mind, confidence. It seems obvious, right? But at these ages, the most important thing is for the child to enjoy it. If when you're 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, you don't enjoy it, you don't feel passion, you don't have a good time, then we're in trouble. So you shouldn't demand anything. I think the most important thing is to convey peace of mind in those moments when you might see the child is when he's euphoric and has scored 10 goals in a game, there's no need to do anything. So maybe when one day the child is a bit down because he hasn't played well or whatever, because he has an injury or something, that's when you have to encourage him, give him peace of mind. And after all, this is just football, it's okay. So you have to convey peace of mind, right? When that doesn't happen, when there's already a lot of pressure from the immediate environment, I think it's bad. Unfortunately, I've seen many, many, many examples of boys with ability, with potential, who were suffering. On Sunday, they suffered, and that shouldn't happen. In the developmental stage, they shouldn't suffer. They have to enjoy it. And it doesn't matter if you win, if you lose, if you're better or worse, they have to enjoy it, because honestly, when the child is relaxed, enjoys it, he absorbs things better, he improves much more. And sometimes, I repeat, the environment, let's say in this case, the parents, always with good intentions, of course, trying to help and but sometimes, look, football has a problem, which is expectations. So with the little ones, everyone has expectations. And expectations, they're fine, but sometimes they can be a problem because you create expectations that aren't right or appropriate for a certain age, right?
Sure. And once a player enters the 16, 17-year-old stage, where it's not just about enjoying it anymore, but it also gets more serious, what signs do you think indicate that a player is on the right track, even if they're not playing?
Well, first, and I think this is very important, right? In these stages, 14, 15, 16, when we start talking about 18, it's different, we're getting closer. But in these stages of 10, 14, 15, there can't be any player who doesn't play. Obviously, there can be players who are at a higher level than others, but a player at these ages has to play. And so I believe personally, clubs and coaches in these developmental stages should stop prioritizing the result, winning or losing. Everyone, we all want to win, obviously, but it's not the most important thing. And what can't happen is that you can't have a kid go 2 or 3 weeks without playing. I mean, you have to share it around. Everyone has to play. Therefore, but of course, at these ages you mentioned, 16 years old, you already start to see, first from a footballing point of view, you start to define a bit positionally where you think each one will perform, right? They're defining themselves physically and they're starting to have not yet, but they're starting to be quite, you see where they can go, their character starts to form, right? We're in a phase where you already start to have signs to see. We were talking before about that character, about rebelling, about how they handle mistakes. Well, here you start to see how they act in these situations. Tactically, we're starting to see concepts, having to work on things, do things. Now it's not just, there are already concepts and things you have to see if they really understand or not. So it's an age where you already start to see or can start to sense what kind of player we're going to have, right?
And is that also a sign that you think that even if the player isn't playing, it says that player is on the right track, so they don't, because many get frustrated in the moment and say, I'm not playing, whatever, or I'll quit. That's the thought of many players. It's the reality.
Of course, of course.
But what is that? Tell me a sign or an example of something that...
Well, I think what you mentioned is very important. When a player, for whatever reason, in an important game, isn't in the starting lineup or whatever, they can do two things. Either or throw in the towel and go to training, like whatever, or they can show up on Monday and tear the opponents apart. And that, for the coach, that's under the magnifying glass. You're using a magnifying glass because you know absolutely everything. So when you see this reaction...
You see these things, right? From the coaches.
If you don't see it, that's a problem. You have to be...
Yeah, okay.
I always, at all levels, right? But at these ages even more, you have to be very attentive to everyone, but basically attentive to the player who, for whatever reason, isn't playing much or is in a bad moment. There you have to be even more attentive, and you have to take more care of him and watch him more and see more of his reactions to help him. So when you see that he arrives after a game where maybe he hasn't done well or he hasn't done well, and you see that he has a passive attitude. If he comes and you see he's hungry for it, that's an important sign that the player is rebelling, that the player wants it. And he wants it.
Of course.
Then that's when the coach, well, damn, that player has, well, maybe next week he plays again, and you see him go out and take on the world, that he wants it. So that's a sign, I think, an important one, right? Which has a lot to do with what we were saying, with attitude, with character, with that desire to be, right? And that becomes more and more important. When they're 13, 14, okay, that's fine. But when you're 16, 17, 18, that attitude shows you very clearly the type of player he's going to be, right? I think.
Yeah. Well, Jordi, I think we've touched on several very important topics for players to understand, for parents to understand as well. And well, this is the second episode already. Thanks again for being here, for sharing your vast amount of knowledge. And we'll keep on talking about 1,000 more topics. But anyway, thanks for being here.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure. You know that talking about football, we could be here for 6 days straight because there are 1,000 things, right? But well, we try to do it with normality and common sense, right?
Perfect. Well, until next time.
Thanks.
So if you want to keep spending time with us and getting valuable information, subscribe and we'll see you in the next episode.